I am here with the absolutely wonderful Alexander Macris, my old boss at the Escapist. I'm super excited for this reunion.
Yay.
Yay! We're doing this sort of informal because this will be ported over to YouTube after this. But the joys of Twitch are here. People are showing up. The joys of Twitch are that we have to wait for people to show up. And do the comments and all that stuff. But yeah, just to kiss Alex's ass for a bit. He's one of the absolute most awesome people I have ever worked for, and I'm going to insult him by calling him a stealth feminist. Yeah, I dropped the F word.
Oh, shit.
I watched this man surrounded by mouthy, well-endowed women, and he said something, and every woman at the table turned on him, and he loved it. So I don't know if you remember that night. You were dressed as a dark Jedi, Alex, in North Carolina.
as I did.
One of us was cosplaying Ivy Valentine that day. Somebody else was Tifa Lockhart, and Mom was here. So it's a party. So we tonight, guys, are talking about Alex's Indiegogo. I talked about this last week, and I'll show it here, and we'll post the link soon. But it's Ascendant Star Spangled Squadron. It's got 16 days left, and this is the whole purpose of it. So if you can back, please back. I will link to it in the chat. But I have read it. You sent me the whole book, didn't you, Alex?
I did. I sent you the whole book. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely fabulous. I was afraid I was actually overthinking the whole thing when I read it, but apparently not. You said I pretty much got it right.
You did, yeah.
Yeah, so the book, I have my elevator pitch for it, and then my cheeky comment. My elevator pitch is it's basically Alan Moore's Supreme meets Suicide Squad. My cheeky pitch is that it's a deconstruction of postmodern deconstruction of comics. Which one would you say is more accurate?
Both are. Why not both? Yeah, that's right. It's a postmodern deconstruction of deconstruction. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, it's Foucault shitting on Derrida like a pigeon poops on another pigeon.
Yeah, that's very accurate, actually.
But what freaking possessed you to do a book like this? I mean, especially, guys, I'm about to show you some art right now. Be prepared. There are somewhat scantily clad women in it the minute Restream cooperates. But what possessed you to do a book that's basically a deconstruction of your standard superhero tropes now and in this way?
That's a great question. So I had for several years been working on a superhero role-playing game.
Okay.
And it was a little bit of a bizarre quest. It was the desire to create a perfectly logarithmic, scale-free role-playing game, similar to the old DC Heroes game from the 80s, but with better math. And as I was moving forward on it, my community was like, this is a really good game, Alex, but it's not going to succeed unless you have a setting to go with it. And so I decided, all right, well, I'll create the setting. And the setting ended up being, very popular, and with the guys that were playtesting the game. And I had several suggestions. You should make this into a graphic novel and sort of build out the IP. Now, as to why the particular form which that setting took, I mean, it probably is a result of my own cracked personality. I mean, I've read a lot of philosophy. I tend to overthink things. I worked in media for many years, so the idea of embedding the story in the context of our multimedia culture made sense. There's some of my cynicism about government in there mixed with my sort of innate sense of patriotism. And there's a sense of, I would say like the conflicting values that appear in my own soul between like the dark side and the light side kind of show up in the book. So, I can't say I set out intentionally to do something specific. It was a very organic process that I think ended up, as I reflected on it and moved through it, kind of evolved in a way that I really was happy with.
Yeah, we already have a comment in chat about your avoiding logarithmic scaling. You can tell this is my audience. Why you avoided all logarithmic scaling? Well, I tee up the next graphic. You can answer that diversion.
No, I didn't avoid logarithmic scaling. The whole system is built on logarithmic scaling, so it embraces logarithmic scaling. So a score of 4 is twice as good as a score of 3 all the way through in every area. So we can model the whole world logarithmically.
Okay, Oron, we have not gotten into Stiletto yet, so let's get into the characters. You got fans, Alex. You got fans. So this, I'll do the Who's Who page. I call the Who's Who page. These are some of the characters. You got Dr. Quantum, Stronghold, Warp, Aurora, and then there's Stiletto. And so we will just get into Stiletto because this is, I think, where people are going to judge the book one way or the other, and possibly why you sent this to me of all people, because I was like, oh, I have that shirt. But that's Stiletto, and she is literally, her superpower is literally she doesn't feel pain, so she can run in heels, correct?
That's one of them, yeah.
Yeah. But she is sort of a Catwoman Kit character, I would say. That's probably the closest approximation, but she's a femme fatale. She's a hypersexualized femme fatale, which goes all the way back pre-comics to the old crime pulps. And you juxtapose her with a super family man, super dad kind of logic character. And the interplay between them seems to create the spine of the story. There's a lot more going on, which we'll get into. But why'd you focus on those two?
Well, in a sense, I think that they're the core archetypes. You have the Paragon of Masculinity, which is American Eagle, and that's an archetype that goes back to people like Hector, right, who arms himself for battle to defend his city, his family, and even when he's outmatched, he's the better man.
Right.
And then the archetype of Stiletto, I think, again, traces back very ancient. It's the archetype of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, the Morrigan. And so whereas he represents, duty, honor, loyalty, she represents passion, lust, ambition, unbridled power. And in a sense, she represents dangerous femininity, whereas, American Eagle's wife is the safe, domesticated femininity. And that interaction of the two creates interesting drama.
Now, did you go with Stiletto first, and that's why you went with that pre-America losing Vietnam form of masculinity, the Captain America masculinity, instead of kind of the Stallone Schwarzenegger beefcake cinema in the 80s, which was a reaction to what was going on in the world? Did you go, okay, Stiletto first, and so then we're going to have this foil, or did you start with him?
I started with Stiletto. So interestingly enough, Stiletto is partly based on my own wife's role-playing game character in our campaign. And my wife was a fetish model in Los Angeles when she was younger, and got up to all sorts of shenanigans, and had always complained that she felt that a lot of female protagonists that were so-called strong women were actually not women at all. They had been defeminized, and they had actually been cut off from their feminine power. And so she wanted a character that was very powerful and very feminine. And so I used, and in fact, actually, all of the characters in the book, in one way or another, have been in various role-playing games. Aurora, if you remember Julianne Capps, who was the editor-in-chief of the Escapist, she played Aurora. So, and Newton Grant played Warp in the playtest campaign.
No way. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I love Newton.
So,
okay.
So the characters evolved a little bit in this back and forth. But yeah, the first script I wrote was Stiletto's script, and and then I said, well, I need to go back and tell the story beforehand so we know what's happening here. And then I said, well, I need to go back and tell the story before that so we know how we got to that point. And then I moved it forward to then tell the story of the team coming together. So it was actually written chapter 3, 2, 1, 4.
Interesting. Okay. You already have won over Eileen in the chat. You could tell a woman's point of view informs Stiletto because we all know the pain of heels and would love to have that superpower. Yeah, the panel I had up there, the sort of who's who, and this was a major deconstruction moment for me. You've got Aurora, who the closest character that I can describe her is like Zari 2 from Legends of Tomorrow. She's a former Next Top Model contestant who becomes a superhero, and she's kind of the Betty to Stiletto's Veronica. But what I liked about her is you didn't go straight up bimbo with her. She's got kind of an industry intelligence without being super book smart.
Right.
And I thought that was a cool, because I mean, in this team, that's the skill she really needs. And so she just breaks down, Heartland Heartthrob and the bad boy from the hood and repping the Hispanic working class and the cute Asian waifu, the fan service for the frat boys. So you must be like for the goth crowd. And that was the panel. I'm like, all right, I get what's going on here. Was it deliberate on your part that you separated the heroes and villains, not from really who was more sympathetic, but you kind of subdivided them based on who was more marketable to the masses?
It was totally on purpose. So the Star Spangled Squadron is a superhero team that's been assembled by the U.S. government. And the premise from the U.S. government's perspective is there are humans of mass destruction walking the earth, and America is going to be terrified of that. So how do we introduce this power under government control without terrifying them? And the premise they come up with is we need to have a really photogenic superhero team that can appeal to all the niches and represent diverse America. And they purposefully give them outrageous costumes and outrageous code names. And in that way, the people can relate to them in context of, oh, this is like a Marvel movie. This is like a DC comic, because those things exist in the world of Ascendant Star Spangled Squadron, which is our world. And so when Aurora says, oh, look, this is what the casting director did, there literally is a person who works in the organization Star Spangled Squadron who was responsible for recruiting the team members and doing their costumes that way and their names. And yet at the same time, it's also a wink, wink, nod, nod to me as the creator of the game, wanting to have the comic, wanting to have a team that would appeal to all my notches for the audience as well. So as you say, it's a deconstruction of a deconstruction.
Now it's a big swing, because I'll show you guys the villains. And you must have had a moment where you're like, am I sure I want to do this?
I had that moment on every panel.
Yeah, like, am I sure I want it? Now that, because I know you're one of us, and because I know that you probably identify with a lot of these characters, the commentary and putting, the guy in the Guy Fawkes mask who uses a wheelchair, and sort of the people who... There's stuff early on in the book where you actually see how people are treated in this world, and use some very, very deliberate language, like simp dropped in there. And I was like, is, I don't think I've ever heard that word come out of your mouth. So, that was a very deliberate word choice. And you've made it so that the people who look probably and act most like the audience are the antagonists. I won't really call them villains, because it's not that kind of book.
Right.
But was that an organic thing, or was that something you were trying to say there?
It was a desire to have more complex characters. I think, my aesthetic, I guess, to the extent I have one, was really informed by a book I read a long time ago called The Romantic Manifesto by Ayn Rand. And she talks about how you should show the world as it could be and should be. And so now, and that's a really important point, because if you just show the world how it should be, then you present utopia, but people can't relate to that. It's not possible. And if you just show the world as it could be, there's nothing aspirational in it. And if you show the world as it is, it can end up being very grim dark. So show the world as it should be and could be. So that means there's going to be darkness in there, because there will always be darkness in the world. Ayn Rand also, like most Russian writers, often uses characters to display particular philosophies. And so the characters in the book actually do kind of embody different philosophies. So Maxim Leader is very Nietzschean. American Eagle is, sort of classical Republican Christianity. Stiletto is kind of a nihilistic libertarianism, etc. And so if the if the exodus come off as sympathetic, I think I've done my job well, because they do have personalities that inform them. They're not doing it because I just wanted to have random bad guys.
Yeah, I was surprised how much I related to sort of the radical feminist antagonist character. I'm like, I kind of see where she comes from
Being
there.
radical?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like, okay, she's making me roll my eyes with her dialogue, but you put in a scene off the top where it's like, this is probably her day-to-day life, and you can understand the bitterness in
Mm-hmm.
in this world. How'd you balance that? Because obviously you want people to enjoy the story, but you got to make a point, and you only had 90 some odd pages to do it. Was it just, well, I'm going to write it and we'll kick it around, or was it much more deliberate in that way? I know you said it was based on your role-playing games, but still, you still got to construct a book with a
Yeah,
beginning, middle,
absolutely.
and end, right?
So I started with the two characters, and then I had this idea for the ending, and so that ending panel came to my mind well before I was very far into the book, and so then from that, I had the question of, all right, so I know how it's going to end, and I know how they're going to meet, and then I had, how are they going to interact with sort of their oppositional forces, and so that kind of structured the in between sections. And there's a very subtle through line that most people miss, about the source of the superpowers and why the action is taking place, where it takes place, and what's going on, and why does Maximum Leader leave the scene at the end, things like that, which I don't necessarily want to give away as spoilers, but so there was a lot of thought really given to that through line. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the whole ascension mechanic, for
Yes.
lack of a better word.
Yeah.
You don't get super into it, but you do. I have my theories about,
Yeah.
but we won't talk about it because we don't want to spoil the comic. But guys, this is the page. The final page that Alex just referenced is my absolute favorite page in the book, and we talked about beforehand. It's like, this is glorious, but we don't want to spoil the ending, so it's the first 6 panels and not the ending. So I think we can show it and not ruin anything, but it is beautiful. I mean, did you see the Batman and go, oh wow, they went the same place we did? But
No, I haven't seen the Batman yet,
oh,
actually.
okay, because I immediately thought, man, if they had just got to this point, I thought it would have been pretty cool. But this is glorious, the way you've just visually juxtaposed both of them, and, pardon the pun, cheekily riffed on strategic butt coverings, or lack thereof,
Yes.
because you can see his butt.
Yep.
And you've got, this sort of sets up everything. You've got him as the family man and her as the money, power, sex. He's flying, she's riding a motorcycle in a thong. How does that work? Is that just a superpower thing again? Does she like
I know
put
riding
something down on the
motorcycles is
seat?
really hard. I was able to test wearing a thong, but I'm not a good driver, so I didn't try the motorcycles.
You did the field research? Excellent, good man. But I mean, this is sort of, this is the core of it, and obviously not everyone would go here, right? I mean, you are inverting the mainstream in terms of what a female superhero is expected to be, what a male superhero is expected to be. We've got all these male anti-heroes and female just I am walking I am statements, right? Like,
Hmm.
every Marvel show is, I know who I am by the end, except not really, but I do, but I don't, because it's all about what happens to the characters, not what they do. And then, I mean, you've got Doctor Strange and Iron Man and all that competing for who's the biggest quippy jerk. Was that a deliberate inversion, or do you just like good guys?
Both, both. You asked me over email. You said, "Why did you pick at this particular scab?"
Yes, that was my framing.
Yeah,
Why did you
why
pick
did
at
I pick at
this?
this particular scab? And my answer was because the wound was infected.
Yeah.
And I think there's a problem in our society that every male protagonist has to get presented as an anti-hero, or toxic in some way, and every female has to be presented as a pure paragon of progressive virtue. And Stiletto is many things, but she's not a paragon of progressive virtue. She gets off on hurting people. She's bloody-minded. She's greedy. She's sultry. At the same time, she's not without her redeeming qualities. And what we see in American Eagle, conversely, is while he's exceptionally virtuous, it's also made clear he's not necessarily the smartest person on the team. And in his attempt to embody and model heroism, he sets himself up for some tragedy. And I go back to the concept of Hector, who, even though he loses, is still the better man. And we see that a bit in American Eagle. He doesn't always win, but at least he's always, the better man. And I think that that's a really valuable archetype for us. Tolkien talks a lot about the old theory of courage, that real courage is knowing that chaos wins, but fighting on anyway, and that defeat is no refutation. And there's an element of that in American Eagle, which I think comes through in one of his battles really well.
Yeah, I mean that the battles were quite interesting because I felt bad for Manticore.
Yeah.
In that, was that deliberate? Were you supposed to sort of? It was very kind of King Kong in it, and I mean that scratches an itch for me. I love the whole legacy of King Kong, but to start off with a good guy beating up some poor sympathetic monster character, was that, I mean, that had to be ahead of a pin in terms of making that work. I don't want to pump up the book so that people get disappointed when they read it, because they're going to read it because they're going to back it. Hint, hint, hint. But I mean, it doesn't seem like there's much fat in this book. How did you make those choices? Was it just like, well, I want people to like everyone in this book, even if they disagree with them? Or was there another? I mean, there's a lot of scabs. There's a lot of, as I call them, volatile trope scabs being picked at this. I can't think of one character that isn't a tropey scab that you pick.
Right.
And you do it through narrative and character instead of 42-minute two-part internet videos. Was that organic, or was that I have something to say and this is the way I'm going to say it?
It was a little bit of both. So the conceit of the setting, and this will go back to Manticore. So the conceit of the setting, Ascension, is that when you ascend, Stiletto talks about this, that set and setting really matter, and then it changes you forever. And the implication, the unstated implication, is that it changes you forever, both physically but also psychologically. And so you can get locked into that moment, and that becomes who you are. And so, we have some sympathy for Manticore because of the circumstances with, he's not a good person, but the circumstances under which he ascended are also very monstrous, and the outcome of his ascension is very monstrous. And so, in a sense, he is helpless to overcome what he has become. And in the same way, Stiletto is somewhat trapped by her ascension. She's immune to pain. She, exudes pheromones. She has unbreakable nails. And, it's not necessarily the most convenient power set, I suppose. And American Eagle, likewise, is somewhat trapped into his ascension in the frame he takes. So I think it, in a sense, there's a tragic element into it because it's, you get everything you wanted in the worst way possible in some senses, for some of the characters anyway.
Yeah, there's a real sympathy for, she's almost a character of pathos, Stiletto, which was super refreshing. I mean, having been in that place of, okay, this is my job. I dress up in shiny black stuff that leaves little to the imagination and go out and do a bunch of stuff, and people are going to think things because that's what they're supposed to think. Obviously, a lot of people are going to miss the nuance.
Yeah.
How do you prepare to launch a project that people are going to take cheap shots at, and you're not going to catch everybody, and certain people are going to say a bunch of really nasty stuff about a character that your wife created and all that stuff. And then Oren is in the chat asking multiple times how she wipes.
I'm going to answer that, Oren. I'm actually
yeah. Okay. There we go. He's the inquiring minds.
All right, so let me go through that one. So first, people have been taking cheap shots at me for years. So you build a tolerance to it. You can't reach everyone. And I'm gonna say something. You might remember me saying this back when we worked together at the Escapist. It was in the context of games, but now it's in the context of comics. I think it's great that there's comics for everybody, games for everybody, but not every comic needs to be for everybody. And I'm not trying to create a comic for everybody. And if you don't get it, that's fine. Don't buy it. If you don't like the art, that's okay. Don't buy it. You don't like the characters, fine. If you love them, buy it. Great, support it. And I'm okay with that at the end of the day. And if you buy it and you love it on a shallow level, that's fine too. My relationship to Lord of the Rings when I was 12 was a lot different to my relationship to the Lord of the Rings when I reread it when I was in my 30s. And I look back at the 12-year-old and I totally didn't get it. But at the time, I really loved it. It was super meaningful to me. So that's fine. I hope there's people that buy it and just are like, man, these characters are epic. Those fight scenes were great. Can't wait for the cosplay community. And I'm sure there's other people that'll buy it and be like, I see Nietzschean, this Derrida influences interacting with Foucault, like some people, So that's fine. In terms of how she wipes, okay, so this is an important note. So Stiletto, there's a cosplayer named Elisa Albrecht. She did the cover option D, and that is the length she wears her nails every day. They're 5 centimeters long. That's just how she lives her life. She says it's no problem, and stop asking.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's her answer.
So that's her.
It's not hard. Stop asking.
In the collectible cards, that's actually her.
Yeah, cover D.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
That's Elisa. That's exactly what she looks like, and that's the length she keeps her nails, and that's not Photoshop. That's just what she looks like.
Oh, there's a lot of people out here that have that. I don't know how they type, but like the receptionists with these talon-like nails. And
yeah, exactly. And her only complaint was she asked me if I could make the characters' boobs bigger so they were the same size as hers.
I know that feel. Yeah. I know that feel a lot. This has got to be a weird thing for you because you've hired a lot of ballsy women, pardon the pun, and you're really good with that. And obviously you don't get credit, for lack of a better term, with it, but you have to be acutely aware of the realities for women who are ambitious and interesting and talented and opinionated and so on and so forth. And then these very, very flat depictions in the media of what women are supposed to be. And we have conversations about this all the time. How do you handle your particular position in this whole thing, that you have the ability to create these books, you have the ability to get these stories told? Is it like, I have a responsibility? Are you doing the whole superhero thing, or is it, this is cool, I just want to make it?
This is a great question. So it is kind of an awkward place. Like my wife is disabled with mitochondrial disease. I've been her stay-at-home caregiver for several years now. So it's so I've seen a very, very powerful, intelligent woman. My wife has a genius IQ, model good looks, master's degree in biomedicine, and I've really seen the impact of disease on someone I care about, and I've had to sort of step up and be a caregiver. And so she's always shocked when she sort of Googles my name and it's like, wow, these people, like, do they even know who you are? And it's like, not really. It's just the nature of the world we live in. So in terms of writing the characters, I actually worked with several wonderful women who I would bounce the dialogue off of very carefully and ask them. There was a really key scene actually in Stiletto Chapter 3 that I changed after feedback from some of the women. I don't mind sharing what that scene is. So there's a scene when she's in the club and she's approached by this guy. And in the original scene, she actually goes and hooks up with him. And the women said, no, this man is too low status. Stiletto would never hook up with him. And I was like, okay, well, that scene's going to go out then. I trust you. So that scene got pulled and changed. Likewise, so there's actually two wonderful Instagram models I worked with for Aurora to ask like their opinion on, how would she view the world, and what would she think of these characters, and how would she interact, and things like that. And so they're credited in the book. You see them. I think I listed them as creative consultants or something like that.
There's a lot of consultants. I
Yeah,
noticed a lot
but
of
they're
them
all
on
in
there
there. And
too.
so I did take it really seriously. The other thing I did, and I recommend this actually to every writer now, is I actually went and read some best-selling romance novels in genre, written by women for women. And that, God, I tell you, that was a really mind-blowing experience. It was like being transported to an alien planet where,
Yeah.
and sort of being the mind of these female protagonists is written like, I told my wife, compared to these characters that I'm reading, like my emotional state as I go through the world is just like this, and like my inner monologue is like this. And then what I'm reading in these books, it's so much intense emotion, and like every glimpse and glance is being analyzed, and like what people say and what they feel. And it's very foreign to how I deal with the world on a much more arm's length kind of basis. And it was really, really helpful for me, I think. And so I totally recommend anyone who wants to write better should read. If you've read a lot of romance novels, maybe read books by male authors or something. But for me, I had not read those, and so that was really hugely helpful.
Yeah, guys,
So I guess I did my homework. I really tried.
I swear Alex did not lurk on last week's stream. You keep bringing up topics of conversation we were discussing last week. It's kind of funny.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. The thing we were talking about romance novels, because I mean, Jane Jensen, who was a very well-known Sierra producer, now writes male romance novels.
Really?
That's what she does full time, and
Wow.
she just pumps them out. And she writes under, I think, a male pseudonym as well. But yeah, I mean, romance is one of those genres. It's heavily gatekeeped by the industry. It's similar. They don't need people to think it's quality. It's almost the antithesis of pro science fiction. They want to make money. They want people to buy their books. They want creative freedom, so everybody can just stay out, think it's trash all they want.
Right.
As opposed to science fiction that does have this, groundbreaking science fiction, hard character science fiction. There's all these conceits, and I think it is because it's a female oriented genre. Right.
Yeah.
So it's automatically dismissed. And I think there is an underpinning with both Aurora and Stiletto in the book. They're used to being dismissed in different ways.
They are.
And they handle it in different ways. And they both have sort of their constructs for dealing with it. And it's not just, oh, Betty and Veronica. There's a real truth there, but all the characters kind of like this. I'm going to go back to this page because one of the things I found interesting is the way you sort of lean into the inclusion is kind of stereotyping thing in superheroes. The fact that they refer to Dr. Quantum straight up as a waifu. You've got the Latino guy always eating. You got that. And I thought this was a pretty deep cut. Like, this was what I meant by the deconstruction. I know that's deliberate. And again, big swing. Where'd you find the line with that? Because it's subtle, but it's not subtle at the same time.
I mean, who knows, right? Like, it hasn't been released to market yet. It's entirely possible I went way over the line and I'm going to suffer years of grief. All I can say is I hope it's well received. I mean, it definitely was deliberate. Aurora is playing dumb. And I think you grok that, right? Because the moment you see her, she's analyzed what's going on. But at the same time, she also plays dumb as a self-defense mechanism. And then Stiletto, likewise, she plays hard as a self-defense mechanism and doesn't let anyone get close. And the one time she tries near the end of the book, she kind of gets rebuffed, and you can tell she's hurt. And so yeah, and that's definitely based on what I have seen in real women in my life that are very beautiful. They tend to adopt one of those two ways of dealing with it. And I don't say that to criticize. Like, we all adopt roles in our lives. Like, when I was running a company, I absolutely had to adopt, CEO role, and there's just certain things you have to do. You can't necessarily be 100% authentic with your feelings all the time in the workplace and things like that. So I don't mean that as criticism. I mean, they're effective for what they are, but at the same time, as a writer, you also want to show that the person is playing a role. They aren't the role. So.
I mean, the thing, Aurora reminded me a lot of, this is going to sound strange, high-end porn stars.
Yes.
Who do the in front of the public, but you get them alone and they can top chapter and verse about early adopter technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's in some ways, and this is what I found interesting, Stiletto is more in a box because she doesn't have that giggle. She has one mode. Aurora gets two.
Yeah.
Right? And I thought that was a really interesting observation, I guess, because that is clearly something you got from the women who were involved in this project and felt very, very real. I mean, the exchanges between Aurora and Stiletto are really, really good. That was something I was very impressed by, as I'm like, okay, that panel passed the Bechdel test and that panel passed the Bechdel test, and probably not deliberately, but they actually talk about concepts. You get Stiletto's view of the world within the first 3 pages of her appearing in the book.
Yeah.
It's a fairly out there view of the world. Like, it's a fairly simplistic in some ways, and yet it's not. Nothing for her is about what it's about.
Right.
And I thought that was pretty deep for a woman who wears a deliberately ridiculous outfit with her butt hanging out the whole time.
Yep.
So it's everything's a misdirection. Everything is that. She presents as not being able to feel pain. You get the sense she's hurting all the time.
Right.
That part wasn't consulted on. That felt too real.
Yeah. No, that's right. She is. Yeah. She's hurting all the time on the inside,
but
and numb on the outside. And yeah. I mean, she's very much, as you say, there's a measure of pathos in her character. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's great to be deeply read. I'm very grateful. So the one that blew my mind was this New York Times bestseller by Sarah J. Maas. It's the Court of something. There's a whole bunch of them, and there's 4 books on the series. And I was tricked into reading them because I was told that they're epic fantasy. And they are, but it's epic fantasy written by a romance writer with a romance protagonist. And that's what made it so strange, because it was like I recognized all of the tropes, and you recognize a fantasy world and fantasy creatures, but it made me think of a book I read in college called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and I was like, I definitely felt I was on an alien world, and highly recommend. She's a great writer as well. I mean, top of her game. Broke out of the niche and is a #1 bestseller.
Someone asked if Stiletto actually enjoys sex. Declined to answer right now.
She enjoys rough sex.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one. Court of Thorns and Roses. Yes.
She is Foucault.
She is. Yes, she is.
She is Foucault. I mean, that's what we talk about Foucault a lot on this channel because of punitive norms. And Stiletto is sort of an embodiment of punitive social norms. She's made it work for her, right? She's all the things women aren't supposed to be, so she can smack you around because there's nowhere to fall.
That's right.
Yeah.
And her backstory, she doesn't go into it too much in the graphic novel, but her backstory, she's already had a really hard fall. She was raised a child of privilege and then lost everything. And she can physically feel sensation. It's just everything is dialed down for her. So.
Which, believe it or not, is actually what it feels like when you do that kind of work. I know I'm oversharing here, guys, but this is an audience where we talk about this stuff a lot, and there is a weird numbing that happens when you are doing for work what most people do for a very intimate form of fun. It's work.
That's
It's
what I had
work.
heard. That's what I had heard as well. Yeah.
You know that thing you said about being a CEO?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're a CEO where your office is your body. And
exactly.
So you are in that sort of numbed state of mind. And I think that might be why I started reading Aristotle on vacation during that period of time, because it was just, wow, I actually connect to something. I feel something when I'm reading this stuff, as opposed to this other stuff that is so, you understand it so intensely. You can pick it apart, pull it into its component parts, and use it and abuse it, and use it to use and abuse other people.
Exactly.
There's no magic anymore, which is a pivot to another question. You are such a fan of this stuff. You have basically, you know, you launched a massive video game website, and, you know, you make comics and everything like that. You write RPGs. You still love this stuff. How do you do that?
That's a great question. Like, how do I maintain my enthusiasm for the medium?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I think if I hadn't started creating, I probably would have lost it by now.
Really?
Yeah, because I definitely, part of my motivation was a sense of dissatisfaction with a lot of what was being created, and not liking the directions they were going. And I don't mean that as per se a critique of quality or as a condemnation of those who do like it. It just wasn't what I wanted, and so I started creating what I did want. And I'll tell you a goofy thing. So I wrote this essay a while back where I said that you could understand the Christian Trinity by playing role-playing games, because the game master, the game designer, who is also a game master, who is also an NPC in his game world, is thus God, the Holy Spirit, and Christ. And so I said that thus we can see that since man is created in God's image, that the holiest of all people is a game designer. And that, you know, and it's cheesy, but on a certain level, I do think there's something very beautiful about that act of creating. And Tolkien talks about that, the beauty of subcreation, and how meaningful he found working on Middle Earth as an almost spiritual act. And that's definitely true for me as well. Like I do take it super seriously. As much as I joke and am lighthearted, I'm very, very serious about it. Like, as an example, you know, there's something like a 5 years backstory already written for everything that's happened, and all the characters and the dates and their birthdays and where they're from. And you don't really see any of that in the book. Like, I don't even mention it. You wouldn't necessarily know or care, but it matters to me because it can inform me. I took this course, a master class, and one of the master class said that, you know, he just writes drama and all that matters is what's on the page, and there is no backstory. And I was like, ooh, that's not how I think about the world at all. Like, so yeah, I guess it's a passion for the genre transformed into a passion for creating for the genre.
Okay, we're going to get to more comments because they just started bombarding here. So it's not me in the videos. That's work me. She only exists while the cameras are rolling. But not Media Star. Now, I should say about Eileen. Eileen runs this monster MCU role-playing game. So you are speaking her language. It's massive. And more comments. Oran put a really, really long one. You can tell which character is my favorite. Stiletto. The Aurora is very interesting. And if she's an in-universe influencer, have you considered actually running her social media empire as a marketing gimmick? We were talking about this off camera.
We were talking about that earlier. Yeah. I would love to do that. I frankly don't know if I'm good enough at social media to pull it off. Like, it's a talent. It's an art. And I don't know if I'm good enough to do it. I would probably have to hire someone who actually was Aurora-like to be able to do it. But yeah, I've thought about it. I think it would be hilarious. And if you buy the role-playing game, all of the backstory is actually presented as in character in the form of news stories. So there's no sort of strict narrative. It's all diegetic news stories. You know, WikiLeaks, New York Times articles, things like that. So I did think about setting up a website that would have all that stuff, and then having their social media and things. Yeah.
You're such a fan of that meta stuff. Is that just because the stuff you tend to read is older and they use that feature New American cinema character driven screenplay.
Yeah, I guess it is. I guess I
Yeah.
really am into very meta things. Yeah.
Yeah. So pivoting out a bit and talking about like general stuff, because we love to talk about this stuff here. We're in this sort of extended period of nuts in the world right now.
Yes.
And what's interesting with where you sit, you're somebody who really doesn't fit anywhere. I mean, you dropped Ayn Rand like it was nothing, not knowing you're among friends here. And one of the characters in my game is based on Ayn Rand and Lillian Reardon from
Yay!
Atlas Shrugged. But you'll just drop that, and then you'll talk about Foucault and you'll talk about Derrida, obviously with some knowledge. How do you navigate the world just not fitting anywhere right now?
Badly.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I mean, I got pretty brutally canceled about 5 years ago and lost 97% of my income. So having gone through that, there's not really much left that anyone can do to you. I just, so it's funny. We'll talk about Ayn Rand. There's a moment in The Fountainhead when the newspaper man, Gail Wynand, has to make a choice between his business profitability and his ethics. And he chooses his business profitability and he sacrifices his ethical values. And it shatters him as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I hit that moment in my own life and I chose my ethics. I think it was the right choice, but you definitely, you do lose the other component. And that took some adjustment. I went through a couple rough years. And the good thing is having gone through that, you've already lost it, and now you're rebuilding on a stronger footing. So I don't really think I fit in too well in any box. But given that our world is absolutely insane, I think that's probably good. I told my best friend from high school the other day that I might be an insane man in a sane world, or I might be a sane man in an insane world, but I'm definitely not a sane man in a sane world. There's just a disconnect there.
I'm going to check your metaphor there because you said it's rebuilding. Is it truly rebuilding, or is it chapter 2 of the hero's journey? The whole thing where you go in, you come out changed, as my camera freezes.
Yeah. No, it's chapter 2. It's chapter 2.
Yeah. Like you go in, you come out changed. And this is the thing about media and comic books and video games and role-playing games. We talked last week about you haven't lived until you have this role-playing scenario that just goes on for years and years and years, and these characters evolve so much because most people from their life surrounding narratives, right? And so they model themselves after stories. And if it's just the call to adventure, and you descend and you go through into darkness and you come out changed and then it ends, that doesn't teach people how to get back up, how to have a second act. I mean, I talk all the time about how the Rocky movies are some of my favorite movies of all time. And it confuses the crap out of people, but it's all him getting stuff and losing it and getting stuff and losing it. You almost get the sense that Rocky Balboa prefers it when he's in the old neighborhood and just having conversations with people. He seems happiest when he's in his restaurant just talking to people.
Yeah.
And because you're so intentional about everything, and you were taking hits for choosing ethics over profits long before fairly current events.
Yeah.
But you're also somebody who's not afraid to take a really big swing. And I think that's one of those things that's been misunderstood about you historically. I mean, you took a chance on me after we debated the process of stoicism and whether it was the suppression of emotions or the processing of emotions. And I'm like, there's no way. What? You want what? Excuse me? That has always been a deal breaker. There's this, and I'm gonna throw it out there, and I think it's got something to do with the whole man thing and how men aren't supposed to do that. Men aren't supposed to just I'm going to do this because I want to. And there's nothing. I think maybe you backfill. You do the Jonathan Haidt thing of a posteriori explanations for things, but the original impulse with you is just so pure.
I
And
think that's probably right. I definitely do the backfill. I think, like, I'll
yeah.
rationalize. Yeah.
Well, it's not so much rationalization. It's more the flashback in the narrative. Like, I did it. And I hear this from a lot of people who are in the military, that you do something and it's split decision, and then you figure out why you did it later.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. And that seems to be a very real thing that is not talked about, because more and more feelings are not, I won't even say they're not okay. It's almost just like they're the one remaining taboo in a society of consumption.
Correct. Right.
You know, and so you always need artifice, you always need structure to be able to approach emotions, whether it be a gameplay mechanic or a comic book. You know, I don't think you could tell the story you could with Stiletto if she wasn't dressed the way she was.
Right.
It would take too long to get into.
Right.
You know, these archetypes are so maligned, but at the same time, there's truth in them. Like you said, they go back a really, really long way. I mean, I would argue the Stiletto archetype goes back as long as we know storytelling has existed, with like Grendel's mother and you know, all the way back.
All the way back. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
All the way back. You look at Norse goddesses. I mean, all of them were goddesses of fertility. Every single one.
Right. That's
yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
And essentially those ancient goddesses were mixed between the safe ones and the dangerous ones, right? So you had, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. No one was particularly worried about, whether Hestia was going to show up and destroy their life. But, someone like a Hecate or an Aphrodite or an Athena, you see the danger there as well as the admiration, and that shows up throughout all of the myths. Ishtar is one of my favorites, or Inanna, depending on what language you want to use.
I really like Nephthys.
She's fascinating because she is a female heroine, 3,000 years ago, who actually does a descent into the underworld and comes back changed, right?
Yep.
Like there she is. She's doing the hero's journey, but it's from this feminine perspective, and she's the goddess of love and war. And you think, why love and war? Why were they related in the minds of the ancients? But there's something there. Today we don't see the real thing of love and war. We call it sex and violence, but like nevertheless, it's there. It's that archetype, and that's what I was trying to tap into. And I think that kind of archetypical storytelling, we betrayed it as a culture. We betrayed our archetypes because we so desperately wanted to prove that we were different, or we were going to subvert them. And this, in a sense, the subversion in Ascendant, it goes full circle, right? Like American Eagle subverts you by not subverting you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you keep waiting for him to go Ozymandias.
Exactly.
And he doesn't.
He doesn't.
I kept going, oh, please don't, just because I hate that set up that, it's the 80s Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct thing. You set up this nuclear family just to have the guy cheat.
Right.
Exactly. And it was so great that there's this between, different characters, and they're feeling each other out, but it never goes, the whole book doesn't go in a way that, and again, I'm like, no, if you actually look at the length of human tradition, that is the tradition.
Right.
It's Penelope waiting for Odysseus.
That's right.
But that's not the story now. And we treat, this whole thing of traditional masculinity as something that's been constructed in the last 30 or 40 years. That's a pretty short tradition for me.
Yeah, that's not that it wasn't constructed in the last 30 or 40 years. It's ancient. And it manifests in different ways, and different cultural flavors get added as seasoning. But Yeah, the relationship between Stiletto and American Eagle, I had a lot of fun writing because my sense was, obviously American Eagle's a red-blooded American man. It's fully apparent to him that Stiletto's drop dead gorgeous. On the other hand, he loves his wife. He's married to his wife. He's got superpowers, so he's not going to be, he can't be dominated by her. And you can tell that Stiletto is attracted to that. And yet at the same time, if he had allowed himself to be seduced by her, that in and itself would have lessened her attraction to him, because then he would have been just another John, so to speak. And so that, there's a narrative needle there, or a narrative thread I'm trying to weave that's challenging, but I think I got it to work.
It was really refreshing, the fact that you have a guy like him and a woman like her that actually have to talk.
Right.
Cool. Right. So often you have that, oh, she comes in and she does the Catwoman thing and it's like, vamp, scratch, boom, she's gone again.
Yeah.
Right. How boring, how cheap. It always just feels, and I rant about this all the time, all the tricks male writers and creators use to avoid the fact they cannot get in a woman's head to save their life. You don't do that. You go right in there. I think Stiletto has more dialogue than American Eagle does.
She does, yeah. She has the most dialogue in the book.
Yeah. And so it's like the anti-George R. R. Martin. It's the anti... what's the other one I complain about all the time? Well, even some of the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, it's like they clearly did not know what to do with this woman. So they went back to the well and did an I Am story. Right. And at the end, they still don't know who this woman is because you're not allowed to. The minute a woman is knowable, she's flawed, therefore imperfect, therefore unlikable, therefore.
Right. That's right. And it really is so crippling on storytelling.
Yeah.
To research, to get into a woman's head, what I did is I did a very detailed anthropological study. I moved in with a woman and I lived with her for 13 years, sort of, and I ate meals with her. I slept in the same room, and it was a really it was a really profound experience. I'm calling it marriage. It's my new term for my research project.
There's so many people though that they point to the woman in their life to paper over the thing they were gonna do anyway. There's a lot of that in the news the last couple of days.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But so often that construction, the institution of marriage, is used as a backfill for a man's motivation, as opposed to, hey, I actually sat down and I actually listened to what my wife was saying today. Like, really listened, not just avoided getting in trouble.
Right.
And I would really love you to write something that deals with that, because so often, and I know I'm just saying, write this for me, please. But it's a marker of your creations when somebody starts telling you what to write. You haven't lived until somebody ships a character you play with another character you play. That has happened to me. It's interesting, but seriously, because there is that marriage.
Yeah.
And so often, and they lived happily ever after is the end of the story. And you've got American Eagle in the middle of his happily ever after.
Right.
Whereas I would like more stories about that, and they just don't exist. And it just seems like people treat a functional relationship or a happy relationship as an uninteresting one.
Right. No, you're right.
Yeah.
So I think it would have been very easy for me probably to fall into some of the traps that you're describing. But life had other plans. When I met Amy, when I met my wife, she was healthy and I was at the top of my game, and and we had certain expectations for what life was going to be like. But she got very, very ill, and bed bound and housebound. And I had a lot of career challenges. And when you're in a circumstance like that, shit gets real, and the stuff that you took for granted before really becomes very meaningful, and you're either going to make it work with that person or you're not, and you're going to either learn what sacrifice and love and devotion are or you're not. And so it's you can't be a caregiver to someone if you don't listen to them, because you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what their life is like, and so I had to learn by listening. And I, by my nature, I'm very much in my own head, right? Like I can just sit in an empty room and just spin my thoughts, and I had to learn to like actually look at like the color of her face when we're out to test, like, is her postural orthostatic tachycardia starting to stop blood flow to her head and she's going to pass out soon, right? And like that's a really different interaction all of a sudden. You have to learn to focus. And and I, as you say, like, it isn't so much rebuilding, it's moving on to a second chapter. And I hopefully I'm a better person for the experiences I've gone through. I certainly have tried to be. I've tried to learn from the bad things as well as the good things. I had there's a joke up until, up until 2012, everything in my life was perfect. And then afterwards, everything started going wrong. It's like, well, okay, how do you deal with that? So.
That's interesting that you cite 2012, right? That seems to be the year a lot of people were like, something shifted.
Yeah.
Something happened in the world. And I think people, and I know I'm keeping you longer, so we will end this thing.
I'm happy to chat. Yeah.
People, I'm going to get real deep on you, but I know you can handle this because I know your people. We think it was cultural, but culture is always at its root about socioeconomics and resources.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this tie between wage stagnation and the cost of housing in major markets and this cultural stuff.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, people started looking for boogeyman. They started looking for the sticking post. They started looking for the rusty nail to pound into the board, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we saw this explosion in postmodern critical theory on the one hand, and this explosion of alternate spirituality on the other. And it's kind of the same thing.
It is, right.
It just pick your poison, right? Do you think the world is permanently changed, or do you think that it is cyclical? Something like, what inspired the original Ghostbusters movie in the 1980s, the phenomenon of PhDs having to put on overalls, inspired that entire thing, because it was the first recession where college-educated men got laid off. Right? So one, are you a Ghostbuster? And
clearly,
2, what do you think? You have that, you're in this interesting point where you say you were at the top of your game then.
Mm-hmm.
I say you're still at the top of your game. The game's just changed.
Fair. So my sense, and I don't want to wax too political, but my sense is that in 2008 we saw that there were some structures in our society that we had set up incorrectly, and they collapsed. And we had a moment where we could have changed things, and we didn't. We papered over the structural flaws. And as a result, since then, increasingly, it's been a zero-sum competition rather than a positive-sum competition, both between our elites and our common mass public, and then internationally for resources. And I think the partisanship that we see in our society is actually very unhealthy, because it's a manipulation of that zero sum in a way that is causing us to fight ourselves rather than address the structural problems that are creating a zero sum society. There's no reason for it to be the way it is. It's their reform would be possible, I think, but it's not under current conditions, and there's too much entrenched people in power that would rather us be at each other's throats. And so I try very hard nowadays on the internet in my general public life to not be at other people's throats, and to accept everyone's going through a hard time and dealing with it in different ways. And so that's about as far as I'd want to go politically. But that's my take on the situation. I do think sometime around 2012, things really did change for the worse. And will they get better? I mean, I think in the long term they will. I definitely think Aristotle and Plato and Polybius and the whole gang were correct. Or Ibn Khaldun about the cyclical nature of history. I worry it won't be in my lifetime. I worry we're in for some dark decades ahead. Although, I think if you had been transported into 1972 America, it probably looked like there were dark decades ahead as well. And 10 years later, we had, the rebirth of the American dream and the Reagan years. So it certainly is possible for change to come and for things to improve. And I'd like that to happen.
Or 1930s America, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, one of the things that's interesting is, on the one hand, and this shows up in the last page of the book, is that on the one hand, things never change, and on the other hand, things can change dramatically in really short periods of time. And both are true, and that's kind of hard to fathom. So I do think things could change, and they might change really quickly. At the same time, if they did change, it doesn't mean we won't be back here in 40 years talking about how they've gone to shit again. So
right, okay, you're on. I'm holding you to that. We're going to be back here in 40 years talking about this.
Okay.
We're going to get lich phylacteries, and we're still going to be here, man, because I don't age.
Squadron issue 400.
Yeah.
American like on a cane. He's
like, you're a creator, and you're clearly anti-partisanship, and yet you wrote a super topical book, and this is my last sort of general question for you, because we debate this all the time. Where is the line between topical and thematic and partisan pandering?
It's a great question, and I think it's a really hard line to know, because, and this is a lesson I think is hard for anyone to learn. It was certainly hard for me to learn. Is the things that I take for granted as just the natural worldview of any person of intelligence. Can seem shockingly partisan to someone with a different worldview. And likewise, the things that they take absolutely for granted can be seen as shockingly partisan to me. And this is even more so when you start to get into the international community. Like, my role-playing game Discord has people from all over the world on it. And it's astonishing sometimes the differences of opinion on really trivial matters, but that are, deeply, deeply rooted in cultural differences. So all I can say is that I didn't want to write a book that was propaganda, because I don't think propaganda is interesting, and I think it limits the shelf life. I did want to write a book that I thought was meaningful and thematic, and that was relevant to our times, but that ideally would be relevant over the long haul as well. And if I did my job well, then that'll come through. And if I failed, and then certainly the readers will let me know. But my endeavor was not to be partisan; it was to be thematic.
Yeah. Well, you know what I thought of it. I wrote you a whole. Oh my God, is this?
Yeah, you did the best reading so far anyone has done. I was so happy because you put the time in, and then you send it out into the world, and you don't know if anyone is going to it's like a video game designer puts Easter eggs. You don't know if anyone is going to find them. And then when they do, it's like, yes.
I admit I was originally going to skim it because I knew I was going to say yes anyway. And I sat down and couldn't stop. And I just read the whole thing in one sitting. And that's why when I say you're at the top of your game creatively, like, it's good. It's really, really good. And I know it's a different skill than, running a bunch of companies with assholes like me working for you and constantly like, but they're both arts in their own way. Before I let you go, do you want to take a few questions from the chat?
Yeah, totally. Happy to. Sure.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That's right. Let's do it.
And a David Eddings reference. That's pretty cool. Have you read that series, The Bulgarian?
Ages ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. That was one of my regrets about my wedding, is I didn't get married in a blue dress, because that's what she got married. I compromised on that one thing.
I got married on Halloween night in a cemetery in New Orleans.
Oh, that's fantastic. Which one?
Which cemetery?
Yeah.
It was this Celtic memorial that they had built for loss of life in one of the tragedies earlier in the city, and so it's this really somber memorial ground, and it has this big Celtic cross, and that's where we got married.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So Reichen's doing my job. I will post again. It is through Indiegogo right now, guys.
Indiegogo.
Yeah, and so you can get a whole bunch of stuff with it. It's funded, like it's way overfunded. You did badass on this. I know how hard these campaigns are, so like kudos, muzzle tov, right?
Thank
But
you.
in the chat, link to it. That is not easy. It is not easy to get anybody to even notice something like this. Never mind have them put money into it, but they can get it there. Are there any incentives you wanna call out that are cool that
Oh yeah, sure. So you can get a copy of the role playing game and the comic book if you're into that. So there's a 2-for-1 deal on there. You can get all 4 alternate covers for a deep discount. That's the featured perk right now. And then a couple other things I think that's really fun. There's an ash can, which is it's a promotional comic. It's 12 pages long, and it's all the original art by Jinky Coronado when she and I first designed the character of Ascendant, like of Stiletto, the actual look and feel. Jinky unfortunately was too busy to be able to do all of the comic itself, but she did the ash can, and so that's a really fun kind of exclusive you can only get through the Indiegogo.
awesome. And are you gonna do any more?
I sure hope so. I mean, as I said, I have the whole universe worked out, and many years of storytelling. I didn't want to make the mistake of Star Wars and have my $1 billion franchise not actually have it all worked out in advance. So I do actually have a coherent story, and there's the mystery inside the mystery box is actually already known, and I'm not making it up as I go along. So yes, I would like to do more.
You mean you don't think George knows all of it? He didn't know all of it from the beginning? Oh,
yeah.
You notice Momo's paw. He's just like, stop being facetious. So here it is, guys. Ascendant Star Spangled Squadron. Alex, it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me on. Awesome.
Yeah. This will port over to YouTube, so more people will see it. And it was just really great catching up with you. Always great to have your insights on things. I think a lot of people in the chat, the regulars, feel like there's someone else thinks the same things we do. It's funny how many beats you hit, and I know you're too busy to lurk on my content. But Reichen says, will it be like Sandman that has an endpoint, but will have side stuff?
So I think the graphic novel has an endpoint. Like it feels like a coherent story. It's definitely open that more stories could be told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a quantum ending, which I love. Yeah. So Eileen has a question now. Of course, they're all coming when I was about to wrap. I have a writing question. When you first got down to actually write the books, did you make a conscious effort of, okay, here's everything from my campaign, now to put it in book form, or was it a more gradual thing, and how overwhelming was it?
What I had done is when I was running the campaign, I always took lots of notes. So I had lots of funny stuff in my head from what I had seen the players do, and so I knew the context of what the characters can do. And one of the beauties of the Ascendant role playing game is that it's very mathematical, so it very carefully defines what everyone can and can't do. So all of that made the writing job much easier. It wasn't overwhelming. In fact, I actually found writing comics was the easiest type of writing I've ever been challenged to do in terms of like the flow. It felt really natural to me. I found it a lot easier than writing a novel, because in writing a novel, when you're trying to describe the world, you have to describe the world from within the point of view of the character. Whereas in writing a comic, you're describing the world from the point of view of what you want the reader to see, which takes away a layer of the intermediation, and then the artist then translates that. And in terms of, since I had 30 years of my life, I'd spent every weekend running role-playing games. I was really used to describing what you see, and so in a sense, it was almost like a one-to-one correspondence. It was really natural for me. Yeah.
That's awesome. TNU, a quantum ending is an ending that just ends. There's no hints at what happens afterwards. It's like the actual end of Watchmen. And one more question. What tabletop RPG system did you use? It's your own system, right?
Yeah, it's my own system.
Yeah.
It's built from scratch. I'll here, just in case anyone's interested. So this is the game. Ascendant.
That's a gorgeous book.
And then it's a big beast. And then it's got, it's full color on the inside. And
is this the same system you distributed via like PDF years ago?
No, different system.
Different system. Okay.
And it's got, all the art inside is by the same team. So it's got, beautiful full color art.
Wow. Full bleed.
Yep. So,
wow.
Here's our Asian team.
Are there digital versions? Russian's asking.
Yes. Yeah. You can purchase the game on DriveThruRPG.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. $20 on DriveThruRPG. So it was actually a #1 bestseller on DriveThruRPG. It's my first #1 bestseller. So that was really exciting. Stayed on the #1 for 3 weeks.
That's fabulous. All right, Alex, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on and dropping an Ayn Rand reference that wasn't me.
You can always count on me for 9 Rand reference.
Oh, I actually forgot about that because I always associate you with the Greeks, and so I forgot about the objectivism because my art director for the game drops Ayn Rand all the time. So I merged you guys.
Ayn Rand is Aristotle for the modern day. We all know that.
There you go. But a Jewish lady.
But a Jewish 20th century Aristotle.
Russian, yeah.
Yeah, Russian Jew. Yeah. Anyway,
yes, it makes sense in its own way. Yeah. All right, guys. So we're gonna wrap this. I'm gonna turn it back around, come back with Horizon Forbidden West, and I'll say about Alex and come back. So we will have games and me swearing my butt off and acting like an idiot. This was your smart quotient for the evening. So thanks everybody. Be right back.